Yeah, I mean, it sounds low-key brilliant. So actually, why don't you elaborate on that?
And that's how we make our money. And so we live within that 15% margin, which has actually forced us to rely on the technology to lower our overhead. That disconnect between the media platform and the applicant tracking is a key problem. So that's something I've been trying to solve now for about 15 years, as I see a big shift of folks turning to AI to try to outsource a lot of their customer service. And I'm not convinced at all that that's the way to go.
Welcome to The Growth Switch, the podcast where we dive into the strategies, struggles, and breakthroughs of bold business leaders. I'm your host, Jules Fox, growth strategist and lead content creator at Aries Media. I'm here to uncover how today's top brands are scaling, overcoming challenges, and unlocking sustainable success. Now, for those of you just tuning in, Aries Media helps grow successful brands with comprehensive hands-on support for sales, business development, and performance marketing. If you're into that, drop growth into the comments, and we will show you how to do that. Now, today we are lucky enough to have Michael Ang, the CEO and founder of JobElephant, who transformed a garage startup into a nationally recognized leader in recruitment advertising by combining 2 decades of industry experience with a passion for simplifying hiring through technology and service. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. I'm not going to be that animated during the show. Don't worry about that. But what's fascinating is, chatting with you earlier, we're chatting about, why JobElephant? Why don't you get into that story behind why you brought this company to life? Like the reason behind that name, JobElephant.
Sure. So the moment was I had in the late 90s had been working for an advertising agency, kind of learned my ropes there, and there was that shift going on between the analog newspaper world and then the digital world. And so I saw an opportunity in the market, like everybody else that started a .com in the late 90s. And they threw our name in the ring proverbially. And I remember at the time, all of the different advertising agencies were usually like just acronyms of the founder's name or some kind of variation of that. And they were just letters that nobody really could relate to. So trying to convey some size similar to our kind of a tip of the cap to Monster Board at the moment that was really taking over the space. We wanted to convey that size, and we wanted to do something that I knew my audience was going to be folks that were practitioners within human resources and talent acquisition. I don't even think talent acquisition was a term then. But in any case, we knew that we wanted to relate to them. And I know from historically, just from my own personal experience, that people collect elephants. There's a lot of really good affinity with that animal. And as we were just chatting about on your family vacations, that you could, they're very photogenic, all those things, right? They're just majestic creatures. So in any case, lots of good karma there with elephants. And so hence JobElephant was born, to try to differentiate ourselves in the space.
Yeah, amazing. And that trunk up is good luck in Thailand. When you see those trunk up statues, that's all good luck.
Exactly.
I feel like JobElephant used to be aspirational, and now it's more like descriptive because you're such a massive powerhouse in the industry, in the space.
It's always the fake it till you make it, right? And I think that applies here as well. I mean, you're always going to be aspiring to something new down the road, right? So I'm always trying to increase that market share and grow the company. And, we've done really well. We found our calling within the nonprofit world. So our advertising agency services a lot of colleges and universities, but we also have diversified in recent years to try to kind of capture some similar markets. But when we first started, 25 years ago, we had like a local community college here in San Diego that used our service. And then it became, one of those word of mouth campaigns where we now service like almost all the community colleges in California. And now that led into 4-year schools and then growth across the country. Today, we represent about a quarter of all the academic market in terms of their recruitment advertising for faculty and staff. Those are 2 different functions on a college campus. But yeah, that's been our growth strategy, is to just kind of land and continue to develop, mine those different, rich ores that we found.
Yeah. And from personal experience, I think that's much needed. My wife is an adjunct professor who's been doing it now for 8 years. It's having some insight into how people hire at a college campus. It's a mess. And I'm saying that politely, but it's a mess. I think that they need your services more than ever, you know?
I think that's part of the function that we provide, and that's part of the reason we've grown, exponentially for over the years, is just because we have really, our purpose is to just kind of do whatever's in the customer's best interest. Sometimes that's in spite of them. And so we will try to, bring that truth to power and tell them, you're doing it wrong. This is the way you should be doing it. Here are the best practices, and at least lay it out for them so that they know what the options are. So can't always change those types of behaviors, but at the same time, little by little, I think we're getting there.
Yeah. And even separate from change, maybe support is a completely different way of approaching it, rather than asking them to change their mind about how the structure works and how they're going to do that, but say, how can I help you along the way?
Yeah, well, and that's something that I've really seen the latest kind of divide in our space lately is, as I see a big shift of folks turning to AI to try to outsource a lot of their customer service. And I'm not convinced at all that that's the way to go. I think that, nobody wants to open up a ticket when they have a question. Nobody wants to, go through the maze of prompts on a telephone in order to try to get to talk to somebody to solve their problem. So we've really doubled, tripled down on our customer service team in terms of making sure that the people that we are putting in those roles actually have a lot of experience in the space so that they know what they're doing. They're not like green people that are just reading from a script, and we're not outsourcing that abroad. This is all, we literally don't even have an auto attendant on our 800 number. People call, human answers. What can we solve? What can we do for you? So I think that is refreshing in today's day and age.
Oh yeah. Because I'll take it a step further. Not only is it a pretty awful experience when you get that AI, but then they ask you afterwards how it went. Right. And you can say, oh, it went terribly. And they're like, great, thank you so much for your feedback. And you're like, no, this is a bad thing. Like, I'm trying to tell you how bad of a job you did, and you're like, yeah, great. Thank you. I really, really appreciate the feedback. This is a great opportunity. Thank you.
So. Right. Yeah. So I see that, again, with our customer base being in academia or in nonprofits, we've expanded into like local governments and things like that. And those folks that are in that space within talent acquisition tend to not have the same resources that the for-profit world has, shockingly, right?
Yeah.
And so they don't have those resources, and they're the ones that are the most in need of that hand-holding, if you will, in order to try to get through the process.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So, with your breadth of experience, a lot of these companies are kind of like, they pop up for a couple of years, they disappear. You guys have been around for a long time. And, even coming from the print to digital recruitment advertising, that's a huge thing. You've been through some of the biggest market crashes that we've faced since the recession. How did you turn all of those challenges into opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, the Great Recession of 08, 09, that really left a mark, and as I look at my in 2025, looking forward into the potential recession that we might be headed towards, that certainly got some PTSD going on in my brain. But I would say that the outcome of that was to just reinvest in getting ourselves technology wise. Like, if there's no work to be done, then work on the process itself. And so we have, I'll tell you, in 2008, we had that time on our hands, if you will, and we then launched our first job board. So we, in addition to being an advertising agency, we noticed that a lot of our vendors were just going belly up after the Great Recession, and our customers were asking for, well, how can we reach that constituency? So whether it was good, bad, or I don't know, but we ended up putting ourselves in that place of like, well, how hard could it be to run a job board? We then did some iterations on that, and now we've had those job boards since 2009. And I think that there's about 250 of those we power either for ourselves or for other properties, and that's been a nice complementary service to our.
Yeah. So, with those iterations, and I feel like that's such a famous last word of like, how hard could that be? Right. Well, let's find out. Let's actually do this. And you actually did do it and launched it successfully. So How are you shifting this in response to today's market pressures and the DEI challenges, for instance, of the recent few months?
Yeah, so we definitely have already been trying to reposition ourselves because the one thing that you haven't mentioned, the calamity of the last quarter century, was COVID. And so the shift from being everybody in the office to now an entirely remote work staff across the United States, that it required an infrastructure change in our IT. So instead of having the server in the closet on site, now it's in the cloud, and then that provided some challenges. So we've been rebuilding our entire ad platform. We have a proprietary ad platform. We rebuilt it in 2015. It's now long in the tooth, and we need to rebuild it again. So we've been already doing that for like 2+ years, kind of in with an eye towards the future. Of one thing I will have seen over and over again is that we tend to do a lot more work than we ever have been. So what I mean by that is just the volume of advertising that processes through our office is gone exponential. I think we do 9 times as much as we did just 10 years ago.
Mm.
So 9 times as much output, but about 50% more headcount. In that headcount is going towards that customer service, trying to, again, focus more on the human to human contact.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've been building things for a long time. You've built a reputation for streamlining the hiring process, making the complex a little bit more simple for everybody involved. So what role does data and technology play in what you're doing like right now?
It's critical. I mean, there's no way we could do what we're doing. The volume, 90% of what we do is done through some kind of automation already. So that's with an eye towards AI. I feel like today we're building the foundation so that AI can then come in and help do those iterations to hone it over time to make it better. But right now, I feel like the moment is to just make sure that you have the right base or platform. You need that foundation, and unless you've got that from the ground up, then you won't be able to really achieve much with AI tools.
Yeah, and it sounds like that's something that you've really focused on, was always being grounded, always having that base platform that you can like launch and expand from there.
Yeah, that's been our real competitive advantage, frankly, from day one, is that kind of very sustained. We build our own tech. We try not to, we partner with a lot of folks, but at the same time, when it comes to our core functionality, a lot of that is all proprietary, built in-house.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's great. That's it. That's a huge competitive advantage. So we've talked a lot about your strengths, and everybody wants to talk about their strengths, but I would love to hear about some of these challenges. What's one thing holding you back?
Well, I think it's pretty clear. You mentioned DEI earlier, and I think that the change and shift in the cultural shift, if you will, to turn against DEI, trying to use that as to score points or what have you, that I think has been a challenge for us. Again, most of our customers are in academia or in and we also work with a lot of executive search firms that service like nonprofits and things like that. So the challenge being that's been a real headwind, let's say, sales wise for 2025. I feel like I need a bingo card for every time somebody says uncertainty. But in any case, yes, that going forward, are we headed towards recession? Who knows? But the attacks on the DEI component also are definitely a challenge.
Yeah. Yeah. So, let's just play make believe here for just a moment and say that you could come down with your like magic hand and just be like, I'm going to fix one thing in this business. What's the biggest roadblock that you would just squash to push your way forward with growth, marketing, and potentially 9x your company over the next 10 years, like you did over the last 10 years?
Yeah. So we've got some good initiatives in that space, and we're making some progress, but it's slow going. But there's a real big disconnect between the job board world still. And what I mean by that is in any, platform that is got, employment ads and the technology that companies use to track those applications, right? So they all use something called an applicant tracking system. There's many out there, Workday is a big common one, or PeopleSoft, you name it. But there's about 1,000 different applicant tracking systems out there in the world. And they just are very hard to work with or to integrate to. And that disconnect between the the media platform and the applicant tracking is a key problem. And so that's something I've been trying to solve now for about 15 years. We actually have found some good partners to be able to do that, some applicant tracking systems that are, as I like to say, playing nice with us and actually solving problems for our customers so that they can actually have that answer to a very fundamental question, which is like, what's my cost per hire? Like, I'm spending so much money on, you name it, whatever platform that might be, Indeed, LinkedIn, etc. What is the ROI there? Am I actually getting hires? And so there's some fascinating questions that can be answered with that technology when when they're talking to each other. But when each side is trying to kill each other, it makes it difficult.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I can imagine. And I work with companies that work with Workday. Workday has its own entire market for apps and all kinds of programs that support Workday. So when I think like comprehensive and simple, I don't usually think also there's 100 companies that support the small micro functions that we do for each individual thing, and you might want to outsource a small piece of this. And I'm like,
right.
It sounds nightmarish.
It's complicated, and I mean, there's some fascinating things that can be done with that, but it ends up being a core tech piece for every company, right? And that's why those big ERP packages exist.
Yeah. And as you said, it's like at the end of the day, it kind of comes down to cost. What is the quality? What is the cost? And then the cost of also, potentially getting a good hire and then wanting them to stick around and not having to rehire, because the cost of rehiring, it could really eat up your budget,
I mean, there's so much more to talent acquisition. I always try to focus on one little tiny bit, and that is, again, that what a lot of people think of as the top end of the funnel of like, I've got an open position, I'd like to fill that. How do I get people to apply to that role so that we can, achieve our mission? Our focus is super, super narrow. I can't believe all the stuff that gets dumped on HR. And then if you even segment that out within talent acquisition, that's a whole nother segment within HR. And so we really are hyper focused on just that one little slice of the job. As I like to tell my customers, it's like they're like a Swiss Army knife of any operation is what HR is in my mind. And we just try to help, we know a lot more about one little tiny aspect of the.
Yeah. And I think that's probably critical. If that's what they need help with in that moment, you outsource it to the expert, you get the help that you need, and you find the right hires, you get the right person, and you don't just task the person, the marketing ninja who also is the HR person, who also is doing the hiring, who also is doing and you're like, no. Just get an expert, do it right the first time, get the right person into the role,
Yeah. I mean, that's our biggest challenge, frankly, beyond, technical issues and things like that is just our pricing model. The fact that we don't charge fees for our services and things like that we get compensated from selling media. That agency model it's a hard concept to get across to our customers or new customers that, they can get this advice for free. And that almost invariably as Americans, where our suspicions are up, it's like, wait a second, where's the catch? What's the deal here? And it's like, well, this is how we work. It's been working for a quarter century.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds low-key brilliant. So actually, why don't you elaborate on that? Because I'm sure some of the people that are tuning in are like, okay, that sounds too good to be true. I want to know more about that.
Yeah, I mean, so this agency model has existed for about 100 years or more, ever since, not as long as newspapers, but as newspaper classifieds and things like that have evolved over time, that then came into this whole industry of online job boards and whatnot. And that's carried over. So recruitment advertising agencies like JobElephant and all the other brethren that I have out there, we're typically compensated 15% of whatever we sell. So when somebody buys a LinkedIn posting through us for $400, we get 15% of that buy. And that's how we make our money. And so we live within that 15% margin, which is pretty narrow, which has actually forced us to rely on the technology to lower our overhead so that we can do as much work as we do.
Yeah, I mean, but like any good business, it's forced you to get better. It's forced you to get those conversions. It's forced you to like increase your capacity and your helpfulness. And once you do that, then you increase the revenue, and then you have a working model of a business, which again, not everybody's able to do.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So where can people find you if they want to reach out and get services like these?
Yeah, so obviously our website, JobElephant.com, and then, we're on all the socials and things like that as well.
Okay, absolutely. And if you're tuning in, just go ahead and look down below. You're going to see some links that will take you to all the good places so that you can work with JobElephant. Michael, thank you so much for your time. It was wonderful having you on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jules.